The chair across the table scraped the floor when my late wife's sister leaned forward, and that sharp sound bounced around the quiet conference room. A thick folder lay open between us, packed with printed emails and bank notices. My daughter sat beside me, tracing the seam of the leather chair with her finger like she wished she could disappear into it. My sister-in-law looked calm, almost bored. "Adam," she said, tapping the papers lightly. "This is exactly what your wife wanted." I watched that smile for a moment longer than I should have. Then I slid one more document across the table. Her smile froze halfway. The room went silent, because the page she just saw wasn't supposed to exist. 2 weeks earlier, the kitchen window was open just enough for the evening air to move the curtains. The smell of tomato sauce simmering on the stove filled the room while the dishwasher hummed under the counter. I stood there stirring a pot I wasn't really paying attention to, watching my daughter at the table with a stack of college brochures spread out in front of her. My late wife's sister sat beside her, pointing at something on one of the pages. "See, this one has a good business program," she said, tapping the brochure with a pen. "And it's only a few hours from the city." My daughter nodded, chewing the end of the pen like she always did when she was thinking. That habit used to drive her mother crazy. I leaned against the counter, the wooden spoon warm in my hand. The house had been quieter since my wife passed away a few months earlier, too quiet sometimes. But evenings like that almost felt normal again. Someone talking at the table, papers scattered around, the soft clink of dishes. Her sister had been around a lot since the funeral. At first, I was grateful. She helped my daughter fill out school forms, drove her to a few campus visits, even organized some of the paperwork that had piled up after the hospital bills and insurance letters started arriving. It seemed like the kind of help any family would offer. Sometimes she stayed late, sitting with my daughter while they compared colleges online. Other nights, she brought over takeout and insisted I take a break from cooking. I remember thinking back then that my wife would have appreciated it. "Did you talk to the financial advisor yet?" she asked me suddenly. I turned the stove down and shrugged. "Not recently." "Why just making sure the college fund is all set?" she said. "Applications are going to come up faster than you think." My daughter looked up from the brochures. "Mom already set that up, remember?" Her sister smiled at her. "I know. I'm just double-checking everything." Nothing about the moment felt strange. If anything, it felt responsible. Later that night, after everyone went upstairs, I stayed in the kitchen a little longer. The house was quiet except for the refrigerator clicking on and the faint hum of the dishwasher finishing its cycle. I wiped down the counter and turned off the kitchen light. The next morning, while I was sitting at my desk with a cup of coffee that had already gone cold, my phone buzzed against the wood. It was a call from our financial advisor. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something about the way it rang short, sharp, twice in a row made me pick it up. "Hey," he said after I answered. "Quick question. Did you ask to change the contact details on your daughter's college account?" I frowned, staring at the wall in front of me. "No," I said slowly. "Why?" There was a short pause on the line. Then he said something that made my stomach tighten. "Because someone did." The week after that call, the house started to feel different. Not louder, not emptier, just different in a way that's hard to explain until you've lived through it. I kept thinking about what the financial advisor had said. Someone had asked to change the contact details on my daughter's college account, not the password, not the balance. Just where the notifications were sent. At first, I assumed it was a simple mistake. Banks mess things up all the time. So that afternoon, I logged into the account from my laptop in the living room while the ceiling fan ticked slowly overhead. Everything looked normal. The balance was still there. No withdrawals, no strange transfers. But one small detail caught my eye. The contact email attached to the account wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to my late wife's sister. I stared at the screen for a long moment, the cursor blinking in the corner like it was waiting for me to react. Maybe she had helped my wife set it up before everything happened. Maybe Laura added her as a backup contact during the months when hospital visits and paperwork were stacking up. That explanation felt reasonable. Still, I picked up my phone and texted her. "Hey, did you update the contact info on Sophie's college fund?" She replied quickly. "Yeah, just helping keep track of things. No explanation, no hesitation, just that." Later that evening, she came over again. The front door clicked shut behind her, and I heard her voice drift in from the hallway while I was in the kitchen. "Hey, kiddo," she said to my daughter. "You finished that essay yet almost?" My daughter answered from the dining table. I stepped out of the kitchen, drying my hands on a towel. "Hey," I said. "Quick question." She looked up casually. "What's up, the college fund account? You changed the contact email." She nodded like it was the most normal thing in the world. "Yeah, I've been keeping an eye on it. With applications coming up, I figured someone should stay on top of the paperwork." Her tone was calm, practical. The kind of voice people use when they're explaining something obvious. My daughter barely looked up from her laptop. "She's been helping with all the college stuff," she said. "It's actually really helpful." I leaned against the doorway for a second, trying to decide why the conversation felt slightly off. "You could have just told me," I said. My sister-in-law shrugged. "You've had a lot going on," she replied. I didn't want to add more stress. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the tapping of my daughter's keyboard and the faint buzz of the porch light outside. I nodded slowly. "Okay," I said. And for a few days, I let it go. But the thing about financial systems, especially, is that they leave trails. 3 nights later, long after my daughter had gone upstairs and the house was quiet again, I opened my laptop and started digging through old emails, some from banks, some from insurance, some from months earlier, when my wife had still been alive. That was when I found it. An email thread between my wife and the bank about the trust connected to the college fund. I read the messages once, then again. Halfway through the thread, there was an attachment, a trust document, and right under my wife's name as trustee, there was another name listed as co-trustee, my sister-in-law. What I didn't understand yet, what I would learn a few days later, was that her name being there changed a lot more than just an email address. 3 days before that meeting, I was sitting in a corner booth at a small cafe downtown with our financial advisor. The table wobbled every time someone walked past, and the smell of fresh bread from the counter kept drifting over between our sentences. I had my laptop open in front of me with the trust document on the screen. "I found this in an old email thread," I said, turning the screen toward him. My wife set this up before she passed. He leaned forward, adjusting his glasses while the low hum of the espresso machine filled the room behind us. For a moment, he didn't say anything. He just read. Then he exhaled slowly. "Well," he said, tapping the screen lightly with his finger. "This explains why the bank allowed the contact change." I frowned. "Because her sister's name is there." He nodded. "Your wife made her a co-trustee, probably as a backup in case something happened while she was sick." I leaned back in the booth, the vinyl seat cool through my shirt. "So she can control the account?" "Not exactly," he said. "But she does have authority to communicate with the bank. And depending on the wording," he scrolled down through the document, "she might have more influence over how the funds are managed than you think." That sentence sat there between us for a second. The cafe door opened behind me and a burst of warm air rolled through the room. Somewhere near the counter, someone laughed loudly, but it sounded far away. "Look," he said after a moment. "This doesn't automatically mean she's doing anything wrong." I nodded slowly. "I know." And I meant it. At that point, part of me was still trying to give her the benefit of the doubt. He kept reading. Then his finger stopped halfway down the page. "Wait," he murmured. He turned the laptop slightly so we could both see the same paragraph. "This section here," he said. "It says the co-trustee can request administrative changes if the primary trustee is unavailable." "My wife was in the hospital when this was written," I said quietly. He nodded again. "That makes sense." For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he looked up at me. "But there's something else." He flipped open a printed statement from the bank that he had brought with him. "These contact changes," he said, pointing to the dates. "They didn't happen when your wife was sick." My chest tightened slightly. "When did they happen?" He slid the paper toward me. I looked at the date, 3 weeks after the funeral. The cafe suddenly felt warmer than it had a minute earlier. So she requested these changes after Laura passed, I asked. According to the bank records. Yes. I stared at the numbers for a long moment. Is that allowed? He hesitated. It depends, he said. But if she changed where notifications are sent without informing you as the parent, that's questionable. The word hung in the air. Questionable. I closed the laptop slowly. Okay, I said. He studied my face for a moment. You might want to speak with an attorney who deals with trusts, he added, just to understand your position. I nodded. Outside the cafe window, traffic rolled past the intersection while the afternoon sun reflected off windshields. Everything looked normal, but the thought that had started forming in my head wouldn't go away, because if those changes were made after the funeral, then my sister-in-law hadn't just been helping. She had been planning something. The night everything finally started to make sense. The house was quiet again, not the peaceful kind of quiet, the kind where every small sound feels louder than it should. The hallway clock ticking, the soft creak of the floor when I shifted in my chair. My daughter had gone upstairs an hour earlier. I could hear the faint thump of music through the ceiling, some playlist she always played while finishing homework. I sat at the dining table with my laptop open and a legal pad beside it. The yellow paper was already covered with notes, dates, email timestamps, questions I didn't yet know how to answer. Earlier that afternoon, I had met with the attorney the financial advisor recommended. Her office was in an older brick building downtown, and the hallway outside smelled faintly like furniture polish. She had spent almost 40 minutes reading the trust document, mostly in silence. At one point, she asked me a simple question. Did your wife ever mention why she added her sister as co-trustee? I shook my head. No. She set this up during the months she was going through treatment. There was a lot happening. The attorney nodded slowly, like she had heard versions of that story before. That's fairly common, she said. People add a family member temporarily when they're dealing with medical issues. It gives someone else the ability to handle paperwork if needed. So the account is under my sister-in-law's control now, I asked. Not fully, she replied. She rotated the document slightly so I could see the section she was pointing at. The trust still belongs to your daughter. And as her parent, you're still responsible for her care. But your sister-in-law does have administrative authority. I frowned. What does that actually mean? It means she can communicate with the bank, request updates. In some cases, approve certain financial decisions tied to the trust. I sat there for a moment. That sounds like control. She gave a small shrug. It's influence, which can feel like control depending on how it's used. That sentence stayed in my head the entire drive home. Now, sitting at the dining table under the dim light above it, I opened my email again and searched through the thread I had found earlier. There were messages between my wife and the bank, questions about the trust, forms being reviewed, routine stuff. But halfway down the chain, I noticed something I hadn't paid attention to before. Another message. Not from the bank, from my sister-in-law. The timestamp was from the same week my wife had signed the trust documents. I clicked it open. The email was short, just a few lines asking the bank about notification settings and account access for co-trustees. At first glance, it looked harmless, but the more I read it, the more something about it bothered me, because the tone wasn't confused. It wasn't someone asking questions about a system they didn't understand. It sounded like someone already thinking ahead. Planning. I leaned back in the chair, the wood creaking softly under my weight. Then I looked at the notes I had written on the legal pad. One column listed the dates from the trust document. Another column listed the dates when the account contact information had been changed. That's when the pattern finally clicked. The trust had been created months before my wife passed, but the contact changes, those happened weeks after the funeral. I ran a hand over my face and stared at the numbers again. The attorney's words echoed in my head. Influence, depending on how it's used. If my sister-in-law had simply been helping, she could have told me about the contact change. She could have said something at dinner. She could have mentioned it when she was helping my daughter with college applications. Instead, she had quietly redirected the account notifications to herself. And she did it after the only person who could explain the decision, my wife, was gone. That realization sat in the room with me for a long time. Then I reached for my phone. The attorney had given me her number earlier that day. She answered after 2 rings. "Hello, it's Adam," I said. "I've been going through the documents again. Did you find something?" I looked at the email still open on my screen. I think I understand what she's doing. There was a short pause on the line. "What do you want to do next?" the attorney asked. I glanced toward the hallway where the light under my daughter's bedroom door glowed faintly. Then I looked back at the laptop. "I want a meeting," I said quietly, "with everyone in the room." The conference room felt colder than it should have, not because of the air conditioning. It was the kind of chill that settles in when everyone in the room knows something important is about to happen. My daughter sat beside me, both hands wrapped around the edge of the chair like she was holding on to something steady. Across the table, my late wife's sister leaned back comfortably, one arm resting on the table. She looked relaxed, almost amused. The attorney sat at the head of the table with a neat stack of documents and a pen lined up beside them. "Thank you for coming," the attorney said calmly. My sister-in-law gave a polite smile. "Of course. I'm just here to make sure everything stays organized for Sophie." Her tone sounded helpful, responsible. If someone had walked into that room without context, they probably would have believed her. The attorney nodded and opened the folder. "We're here to review the trust connected to Sophie's college fund," she said. "Specifically, some administrative changes that were made recently." My sister-in-law barely glanced at the documents. "Yes," she said lightly. "I've been helping monitor the account. With college applications coming up, it seemed like the responsible thing to do." Beside me, my daughter shifted slightly in her chair. I could feel the tension in the room building like pressure behind a closed door. The attorney slid one page across the table. "This document shows the trust structure originally created by Sophie's mother," she said. My sister-in-law nodded. "Right." Then another page followed, and this page shows the account contact updates made several weeks after the funeral. That was the moment when her expression changed, not dramatically. Just a slight pause before she spoke again. "Yes," she said slowly. "I requested those changes so I could keep track of the account activity." Her eyes moved toward me. I was trying to help. The attorney didn't react. Instead, she placed another printed page on the table. "This email," she said, "shows communication between you and the bank regarding notification settings." My sister-in-law looked down at it briefly. "That was during Laura's treatment," she replied. "She asked me to look into it." The attorney folded her hands together. "The email is dated before the trust was finalized," she said. "But the contact changes themselves were made weeks after Laura passed." The room went quiet, for the first time since the meeting began. My sister-in-law didn't immediately answer. I watched her eyes move from the paper to me, then back to the attorney. "I don't see the issue," she said finally. "I'm listed as co-trustee." "That's correct," the attorney said. She slid one final document across the table. "But this statement from the bank shows that notification access was redirected entirely to your email address without informing Sophie's legal guardian." My sister-in-law blinked once, slowly. "That was just an administrative adjustment," she said. I leaned forward then, resting my hands on the table. The wood felt cool under my palms. "You never mentioned it," I said quietly. She turned toward me. "You were dealing with a lot," she replied. "I didn't want to overwhelm you with paperwork." My daughter shifted again beside me. "Dad," she whispered. I didn't look away from my sister-in-law. "You changed the contact settings 3 weeks after the funeral," I said. She didn't answer. The attorney spoke instead. "Under the terms of this trust," she said calmly, "a co-trustee may assist with administrative tasks. However, redirecting account notifications without notifying the primary guardian raises concerns about oversight and authority." The word hung in the air. Authority. My sister-in-law finally leaned forward. "I was protecting Sophie's future," she said firmly. My daughter looked between us. "What does that mean?" she asked. The attorney answered before anyone else could. "It means," she said carefully, "that from this point forward, The account notifications and financial communication will be shared with Sophie's father as the primary guardian. My sister-in-law's face tightened slightly. And the co-trustee authority, she asked. The attorney closed the folder. Will be limited to the terms originally intended. Silence filled the room. Outside the window, traffic moved through the intersection while sunlight reflected off passing cars. My sister-in-law looked down at the documents again. For the first time since the meeting began, she didn't have anything to say. The page that had stopped her smile earlier was still sitting in front of her, the one showing the bank records, the one proving exactly when the changes were made. That was the moment she understood something. The plan she thought no one would notice had just ended. The house felt different after that meeting. Not louder, not emptier, just settled in a way it hadn't been for months. A week later, the attorney filed the formal notice with the bank and the trust administrator. It wasn't dramatic. No police showed up. No one got dragged out of a room. That's not how these things usually work in real life. Instead, it moved slowly through the system. The bank restored the account notifications to both me and the trust administrator. The attorney also submitted a formal objection regarding the contact changes that had been made without informing the legal guardian. From there, the trust had to go through a review process. It took almost 2 months. During that time, my late wife's sister stopped coming by the house. At first, my daughter asked about her. Then, gradually, she stopped asking. When the review finally ended, the result was simple. Her co-trustee authority was formally restricted to record access only. She no longer had the ability to request administrative changes or redirect any financial communication related to my daughter's education fund. Everything now required confirmation from me as the parent. No courtroom drama, no speeches. Just paperwork quietly correcting something that never should have happened. Some evenings now, my daughter and I sit at the same dining table with her college brochures spread out again. The house still carries echoes of the life we had before, but it no longer feels like someone else is quietly steering it. And if you've ever trusted someone in your family with something important, only to realize later that they were moving things behind your back, tell me what you would have done in my place.